Every second, about 75,000 gallons of water pour over the American side of Niagara Falls. New York State has spent the last 10 years planning to shut all of it off. Not because of a drought, not because of a leak, because of two bridges. Two stone arch bridges, built in 1901, that carry tourists from the mainland out to Goat Island. They have been held up by short-term Army-style trusses since 2004. 22 years on a fix that was meant to last a single building season. There is only one real way to replace them. Build a dam across the upper Niagara River, push the whole American Channel toward the Canadian side, and let the American Falls run dry. For somewhere between 5 and 9 months. The repair has a price tag of around $35 million. As of late 2025, not $1 of it has been paid for. But here is the part nobody talks about. This is not really a story about water. It is a story about a bill that came due, a repair that everyone agreed on and nobody paid for, and a piece of 1901 building work that the modern state of New York cannot figure out how to take down without turning off a natural wonder. To understand how it got to this point, you have to start with the bridges themselves. The Niagara Reservation, the New York side of the falls, is the oldest state park in the country. It opened in 1885, laid out by Frederick Law Olmsted, the same man who designed Central Park. Part of his plan was a path out to Goat Island, the slab of land that sits in the middle of the river, right at the edge. In 1901, the state rebuilt the two bridges on that path, timed to the Pan American Exposition over in Buffalo. One span runs 424 feet from the mainland to a smaller island called Green Island. The second runs 245 feet from Green Island to Goat Island, stone and concrete arches. For 100 years, they carried people on foot, horse carriages, and the open-air park trolley. Then the arches began to fail. By 2004, the concrete had worn down so badly that the state closed the bridges and bolted short-term truss frames over the top of them. These are maybe trusses, the same kind of build-it-fast steel span the Army uses to cross a river quickly. The trolley stopped running. The bridges were cut back to people on foot and park vehicles only. In 2005, an engineering report gave the answer. The arches were too far gone to save. They did not need a repair. They needed a full replacement. In 2013, the bridges were closed again as they kept falling apart. In 2015, the state put out a design report and a study of how the work would affect the area. In January 2016, New York held a public meeting and laid out 3 choices. Choice 1, dry up the falls from about August to December. Choice 2, dry it up from April to December. Choice 3, do not move the water at all, a plan that could take 3 years and cost far more. The falls would not go dry before 2019 at the soonest, and there was no money set aside. When the job was first priced in 2016, the number was around $24 million. By 2025, it had climbed to about $35 million. The project has gotten $11 million more costly without a single bridge being touched. In 2019, the dry-up would not happen that year either. By 2022, the mayor of Niagara Falls was pushing Congress and the United States Senate, hoping building work could start around 2025. In September 2025, New York hired an engineering firm to study the problem again, this time looking for ways to cut the river's flow without stopping it fully. The cost guess still sat near $35 million. The money still did not exist. The bridges are now 124 years old. The short-term trusses are 21 years old. A fix labeled short-term has now been holding weight longer than some of the people who put it up have been on the job. And the trusses were never meant to be the answer. Even those short-term frames have to come out one day. They do not have the look of the stone-faced first bridges, and they block the views of the rapids that the bridges were built to show off. For 2 decades, Niagara Falls State Park has been running on a bridge inside a bridge, a 1901 arch that failed, wrapped in a 2004 patch that is now getting old too. Neither one is the lasting crossing. Nobody has built the lasting crossing. Now, zoom in. The Niagara River runs 36 miles, joining Lake Erie to Lake Ontario, draining 4 of the 5 Great Lakes through a single channel. As it nears the drop, the river splits around Goat Island. On the Canadian side, Horseshoe Falls. On the New York side, the American Falls and the much smaller Bridal Veil Falls, split by a sliver of rock called Luna Island. Goat Island sits in the middle of all of it, right on the edge. Green Island is the smaller stepping stone between Goat Island and the mainland. The only way to walk to Goat Island from New York is across those 2 failing bridges, or across the American Rapids Bridge, a separate highway-style span built in 1965 that carries cars. Goat Island is not a side note. It is the heart of the New York Park. Its paths lead to Terrapin Point at the very edge of Horseshoe Falls, to the elevator down to the Cave of the Winds, and out to the Three Sisters Islands set in the rapids. Millions of people cross those two bridges every year to reach it, and the bridges do not cross calm water. The upper Niagara Rapids drop about 15 meters in the last 800 meters before the edge. The 1901 builders ran their stone arches straight over white water. And here's the split that matters. The American Falls carries only about 10% of the river. Horseshoe Falls takes everything else. Here is something about this place that rarely gets mentioned. The falls are not standing still. The edge of Niagara Falls has moved about 7 miles upstream over the last 12,500 years, eating its way back from a starting line near Lewiston, New York. The reason it moves at all is the rock itself. The lip of the falls is a hard band of limestone called Lockport Dolomite. Under it sits a much softer layer, Rochester Shale. Water works into the cracks. The soft shale washes out from below. And sooner or later, the hard cap loses its support and breaks off in slabs. That is not a breakdown. That is how a waterfall walks upstream. In the past, the falls moved back 3 to 5 feet a year. Today, with so much water pulled off for power, the pace has slowed to about a foot a year. The waterfall in every photo is a slow-moving wearing away of rock that people have spent a century trying to put the brakes on. So how do you turn off a waterfall? You do not. You move the river. Start with the rules. The 1950 Niagara River Diversion Treaty, signed by the United States and Canada and still in force, sets how much water is allowed to reach the falls at all. The river carries about 200,000 cubic feet of water per second. During busy daytime hours in the tourist months, at least 100,000 cubic feet per second has to go over the edge. After dark, that low point drops to 50,000, and between November and April, another 50,000 can be pulled off on top of that. On a winter night, about 3/4 of the water that could fall over Niagara Falls is instead running through tunnels to the power plants. Niagara Falls has run on a dimmer switch for 75 years. Most visitors are watching a setting, not a flood. Drying up the American Falls is the same trick taken to its limit. Engineers build a cofferdam. Picture the upper river as a wide, shallow tray of moving water, and picture dropping a low wall across one lane of that tray. Build that wall from the mainland to the east tip of Goat Island, and the water has nowhere to go but toward the Canadian side. The American Channel drains. The riverbed above the falls goes from rapids to bare rock. That is the only way the bridge work happens. You cannot pour new bridge supports and lock new bases to bedrock with white water running across the site. The new footings have to be built in the dry. Build in the dry or do not build at all. When the work is done, the cofferdam comes back out. The rock is hauled away, and the river is let back into the American Channel. Under the longer of the two choices, that full loop keeps the American Falls dry across a whole tourist season. And here is a twist that did not exist in the past. The Great Lakes have been running high, lake levels are higher now, and the project has to plan for them. More water in Lake Erie means more water shoving down the Niagara River, which means a cofferdam in 2026 has to hold back more than the same kind of dam would have a few decades ago. The job is not just unpaid for. By the river's own math, it is getting harder to do while everyone waits. And this is the thing to understand about Niagara Falls. It is as much built by people as it is natural. The edge has been reshaped. The flow is set by treaty. The rock face has been bolted and tied with cable. The waterfall that millions of people photograph as a wild force is closer to a machine that people run. Turning the American Falls off for a building project is not a break of something untouched. It is one more setting on a control panel that has been there for more than a century. If you are finding this useful, subscribe. We break down the broken down structures, the water systems, and the slow-moving land stories behind the landmarks people think they already understand, every week, with the full picture you need to follow what is going on. So, what happens when the water goes? First, the falls themselves. The American Falls becomes a cliff. An 11-story drop of bare, stained rock, with a pile of boulders fully out in the open at its base. Bridal Veil Falls beside it shrinks to a trickle. For as long as the project runs, the American side of Niagara Falls is a waterfall with no water. Second, the site flips. A dry falls is a once-in-a-lifetime thing to see. The last time it happened, in 1969, it pulled huge crowds. A dried-up American Falls could become its own draw for a year. while Horseshoe Falls, taking the moved-over flow, would run heavier than usual and likely look better than ever. There is proof this can pull people in. In 1969, a dry falls did not drive visitors away. It drew them in by the 100,000. The strangeness of a switched-off wonder may be the one part of this project that always pays off in attention. Third, Goat Island's life support. The two old bridges do not just carry tourists. They carry the power line and the phone lines out to the island. Before a single arch can be torn down, every one of those lines has to be moved, because the moment the bridges come down, the power to Goat Island comes down with them. The island will stay open the whole time, reached by the 1965 American Rapids Bridge. But the island's power, its lights, its pumps, its safety systems, all run right now across the very things set to be torn apart. The crossing and the life support are the same thing. Fourth, the city. Niagara Falls, New York, has watched the Canadian side out-earn it for decades, pulling only a small share of the hotel money next to the river. And this rivalry is not new. By the 1960s, the American side was already losing visitors to the Canadian side's casinos and theme parks, and that worry helped drive the 1969 project in the first place. The goal was not just to study the falls, it was to give it a fresh new look and pull the crowds back. A months-long building project in the middle of the state park is either a gift for marketing or a wound for the local money, and which one it becomes depends fully on how the state handles it. Fifth, the border. The Niagara River is a line between two countries. Moving the American Channel sends more water to Canada and changes the flow on both sides. Any plan has to be cleared by the International Joint Commission. Turning off the falls is not a choice New York gets to make alone. This has all happened before, and it had a practice run. In November 1966, about 40 workers from the State Park Board pulled on hip boots and waded into the American Channel above the falls. Their job was to clear out junk, including a 10-ton steel float that had been stuck in the river since 1959. To do it safely, crews cut the flow down from around 60,000 gallons per second to about 15,000 for about 6 hours by pushing water to the power plants and through the control gates upstream. It was a small, quiet test of an idea. You can choke this river when you have to. 3 years later came the real thing. The worry had a clear cause. Big rock falls, including a large collapse back in 1931, had dropped a huge amount of stone at the base of the American Falls. By the time it was measured, the rock pile reached around 3.5 million cubic feet and stood, in some places, 10 stories high. At some points, it had buried so much of the cliff that the true waterfall above it was cut about in half. American leaders looked at that and saw a wonder slowly turning into a rock slide. So in 1969, the United States Army Corps of Engineers was sent in to study it. The fix was the same one on the table today: build a cofferdam. Starting June 9, 1969, more than 1,000 trucks spent 3 days dumping rock into the upper river. 28,000 tons of it, packed into a dam 600 feet wide across the American Channel. On June 12, 1969, after running over that ledge for something like 12,000 years, the American Falls stopped. It was not quite the first time the water had gone quiet. Ice jams drifting down from Lake Erie had choked the falls to a near trickle on a few winter days over the centuries. But those were chance events of weather, and they lasted hours. This was on purpose, and it was built to last months. What the dry riverbed gave up is the part people still remember. Engineers walked the bare rock. They found millions of coins. They found the remains of a deer wedged in the rock pile. And they found the remains of two people, a man and a woman, that the river had been holding. The crowds came anyway. In the first week, an estimated 100,000 people showed up to see a waterfall switched off. People were stunned by the sight, and by something they had not expected: the silence. Visitors who had seen the falls before missed the sound of the water more than the water itself. With the channel dry, the Corps did real science. The project ran on a budget that reached about $1.5 million. Crews drilled rock cores along the face of the falls. They poured dye into the cracks and watched where it came out. What they found was the wearing away at work. Water was seeping under the hard limestone cap and eating the soft shale below, the same thing that had been walking the falls upstream for 12,000 years, just running faster. They drilled, bolted, tied with cable, and wired the rock face with electric rock slide sensors. Then came the call about the rock pile. Hauling the whole pile away had a price near $26 million in 1970s money. There was also a quieter finding. The rock pile was likely holding up the face of the American Falls. take it away, and you might speed up the very collapse you were trying to stop. In 1974, the call came down against taking it out. The rock was left right where it sat. There was another reason the appetite for big, bold action faded. By the time the project wrapped, the country had changed. America had held its first Earth Day. Silent Spring had been read. The news was carrying the slow ruin of Lake Erie, just upstream, where 700 factories were dumping 250 million gallons of wastewater into the Niagara River every day. 2 miles from the falls, the Love Canal neighborhood was being contaminated by buried chemicals. Against that backdrop, fixing up a natural wonder stopped looking smart. It started to look like too much pride. The water was turned back on in late November 1969, and everyone walked away. The lesson buried in that story is the one the modern project keeps proving. Turning Niagara Falls off is not the hard part. The Army Corps did it in 3 days with rock and trucks. The hard part is everything around it. The studies, the sign-offs, the two-country approval, the money. The 1969 dry-up was a federal job with a federal budget. The 2026 version is a state park repair with no budget at all. And that is the real building failure. Not the arches cracking. Concrete cracks. Stone gives way. Every structure built in 1901 was always going to reach this point. The failure is the 20 years of knowing exactly what was wrong, exactly how to fix it, and exactly what it would cost, and still showing up in 2026 with short-term trusses, a stack of reports, a price tag that keeps climbing, and an empty line where the money should be. So the questions stack up, and most of them have no answer yet. When does the money actually show up, if it shows up at all? The guess sits near $35 million. The state has been asking for a decade, and the number has only moved one way. Which choice wins? The 5-month dry season, the 9-month one, or the slower plan that never blocks the water? Whether the latest engineering study finds a real way to cut the flow without stopping it, whether higher lake levels force a bigger, costlier cofferdam than anyone planned for, whether a dry American Falls helps the city of Niagara Falls or quietly hands another season to the Canadian side. And the oldest question of all, the one first asked back in 2016 and never answered since. How did builders in 1901, with steam cranes and horses and hand tools, put these bridges up over a live river, while the state in 2026, with everything modern engineering has, says the only way to take them down is to turn the river off? There is no answer to that yet. What is certain is simpler. The two bridges are still standing, still wearing their short-term trusses, still carrying the power lines out to Goat Island. The repair is still unpaid for. The plan is still only a plan. And every second, while the meetings go on and the price tag climbs, about 75,000 gallons of water keep pouring over the American Falls onto a pile of rock that engineers chose, more than 50 years ago, to leave right where it was.